Vamos a recibir ahora desde Canadá a Allison Garvie. Ella viene representando a Richardson International y nos va a estar hablando de Perspectivas del mercado canadiense 2024-2025. Vamos a recibirle con un fuerte aplauso.
Hola, buenas tardes. Thank you very much for having me here today, and thanks to everyone that helped organize this year's event. This is my second ALIM, and I look forward to attending more in the future. Today, I'm here on behalf of Cereals Canada to present the market outlook on Canadian wheat for this year. I do apologize, there's quite a bit of information, so I will go fairly fast through. Today, we are going to briefly discuss these four topics. So the world wheat markets, the 2024 growing season, 2023-2024 Canadian production, and looking forward. Just to briefly recap the world wheat market, as I know it's been discussed already today. Here on the left, we have a chart representing the average world wheat production during the years of 2019 to 2023. In red, you can see the Canadian production, which is at about 4% of the entire world wheat production. And moving on to the right-hand side, the chart represents the world trade. Here you can see Canada is actually about 12% of that entire world trade during those years. To look at exports, during that exact same period, Canada averaged approximately 18.3 million metric tons for world wheat exports. The largest markets being China, Indonesia, Japan, followed by Peru and Colombia. Focusing on the Latin American exports during that time period, Canada exported 5.5 million metric tons of non-wheat durum into Peru, Colombia. But following those two places, Ecuador and Mexico are also large importers of Canadian wheat. To briefly talk on durum, again, looking at those same periods of 2019 to 2023, on the left, you can see the world durum production, of which Canada is about 15% of that world production. On the right-hand side, you can see the durum trade, of which Canada actually is the largest exporter of durum at about 53% of the world trade. Canadian durum exports averaged 4.6 million metric tons. Italy, Algeria, and Morocco are the largest importers of that Canadian durum. Looking at the growing season this year. On this map, in the gold color, we can see the wheat production areas, and in that blue is that main durum growing region across Western Canada. To focus in on non-durum wheat, broken down by province, Alberta and Saskatchewan are the largest wheat growing regions, holding 34 to 38% respectively. Manitoba will account for about 18% of the total wheat growing regions, and Western Canada will make up that last 10%. Or Eastern Canada, I apologize. To look at durum, the majority of Canadian durum is grown in Saskatchewan. They account for 81% of the production area, and Alberta will account for 19% of the production area. Here, we're just showing the Canadian growing calendar. So our planting time will be in May to June, followed by our growing season from June into August. And the Canadian harvest will begin late August into October. And now we are sadly getting ready for our winter season from November till about April. Looking at some precipitation during our seeding stage. So this chart here is going to show the precipitation up for 30 days up until May 31st. The areas in blue or that purple color, they're going to actually show areas that received 200% above normal amount of precipitation at the planting stage. That was a lot of rain in those areas, and that rain did impact and delay the planting for those regions. The amount of precipitation being above normal across Western Canada did help our soil moisture levels. And as you can see, in comparison to the year previous, it was fairly dry soil conditions. And on the right, looking at 2024, you can see much improved soil moisture levels, which was good. Around that time frame of July, there may have potentially been some comments or some talks about lower protein content for the Canadian wheat due to all the rain that we were seeing up until that point. But as we moved through the growing season into July, as shown here, our temperatures were above average. Western Canada saw some extreme heats. And while we were seeing those extreme heats, we were also seeing below average precipitation levels, which really did actually, in the end, as we'll talk about later, kind of help our protein content levels. And I would say that we are at a very good crop coming out of Canada again this year. So back to some high protein wheats. This map here is a little outdated, and if I were to say, as of today, the harvest across Western Canada is now 100% complete across all of those regions. For anyone who does want to follow along with the Canadian crop, you can visit the website here at Cereals Canada. During the months of May till October, they will actually put out a bi-weekly crop report, which is made in conjunction with all of the local provinces to give updates on the Canadian crop. Our production this year. Here we have a chart, and it just breaks down the percentage of the Canadian wheat crop by variety. So this is for the 2023 year. The breakdown for our 2024 year won't be published until December, but I would expect that the numbers this year will be very similar to what we did see in 2023. Representing 63% of the Canadian wheat varieties will be our CWRS, or our Canadian Western Red Spring Wheat, and it accounts for that 63%. Our Durham wheat is going to be our next largest wheat variety, and it accounts for about 12%. Winter wheat will be at about 10%, and the CPSR, or the Canadian Prairie Spring Wheat, is about 8% of our total varieties. Looking at our seeded acres this year, in blue is 2024 in comparison to last year. No major changes across seeded acres in Western Canada. You can see fairly consistent non-Durham wheat acres as well as Durham wheat. And I would expect going forward out of Canada that these numbers are going to remain fairly consistent, just due to the agronomics that we do need for crop rotations in Western Canada. So looking forward, our forecasted production this year for Canadian wheat is going to be at about 34.2 million metric tons. If we were to look at just non-durum wheat, we're looking at about 28.2 million metric tons, a very similar production number to what we did see the previous year. And spring wheat, as you can see, at 25.2 million metric tons is going to account for a large portion of that non-durum wheat production number. Durum wheat, we did see a significant change this year in our crop at about 6 million metric tons versus last year's number at about 4 million metric tons. The yield in blue is going to be our durum yield. So just to show here, the increased production is really due to that increased yield, which benefited this year from the additional soil moisture levels and that precipitation. The durum region in Canada is typically a very dry region, and the durum really benefited this year from that additional precipitation that we saw. So the average yield per acre this year on durum is going to be about 35.9 bushels per acre. In orange, we have our non-durum wheat yield, and that this year is at about 52.3 bushels per acre, which is very similar to what we would have seen last year. To begin on non-durum wheat for the supply and disposition, we have a carry-in expected of about 4.2 million metric tons. As we talked about, our production is estimated at 28.2 million metric tons. The domestic use this year, I would expect to be around the same numbers that we saw last year at 7.9 million metric tons. And we have exports this year at about 20.6 million metric tons, a little bit below what we maybe would have seen last year for exports. With all of that, the forecasted ending stocks in non-durum wheat out of Canada this year will be about 4 million metric tons. Again, very similar to what we would have seen this past year. Durum wheat, a carry-in of about 400,000. Our production number at 6 million metric tons. Again, a very similar domestic use for durum. This year, exports, we do anticipate to be larger with the larger production numbers at about 4.8 million metric tons, and about an ending stocks of 900,000, which I would say is a very typical carry-out for the durum market in Canada. I won't go through all of the characteristics here of the different classes of wheat, but I will touch on a couple kind of like high-level points. So the CWRS variety, this is our hard wheat, and it has a high protein content to it. It's typically used as an improver wheat in blends, and it will often have a high test weight to it. It has a strong but mellow gluten index, which means it has a good balance of strength, but also extensibility. Our CPSR variety, this is our medium protein wheat, and it's ideally used in pan breads or those flat breads, the crackers. We are now kind of starting to see some of the newer varieties of the CPSR also have some stronger gluten properties to it. And CPSR is sometimes used in production of pastas in Latin America. Our quad, as we saw earlier, Canada is the largest exporter of durum in the world. Our quad will always have a high HVK level, which means that it yields high semolina yields. It also is high in protein and strong gluten content to it. Durum will also have a very excellent yellow pigment, and that results in a very bright yellow semolina. In the Algerian and the Moroccan markets, that color, that bright yellow, is an extremely important quality to them. Some notes on the quality that we anticipate having this year. This is all preliminary at this point, but for CWRS, the average protein will be somewhere between 13.8 to 14.3. There is some very small amounts of some degrading factors in the HVK and the test weight, but I would say for CWRS, we're mainly looking at number 1s or number 2s grades, which is what we would have seen this past year. For Durham, there's a little bit of variability, as you can see here in the proteins by different grade class. This year, there will be some degrading factors of test weight throughout the Durham, and that's really due to that heat that we had during our growing season. It really impacted that test weight value. CPSR, it's going to be, again, right around that 12.5% to 13% protein. Cereals Canada will be hosting some webinars. The dates are listed here, as well as the languages that they will be translated in. I do suggest, should you have any technical questions on any of the Canadian wheat specs, to log on and discuss here with Cereals Canada. The events can be found also at this website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. Thank you.